Welcome back to the last of my morning readings from Luke's chapters 18 and 19. And this morning we are looking at Luke chapter 19, 11 to 27. Now, yesterday we were looking at the story of Zacchaeus, and today we have the story of the 10 talents. And it's interesting how we are so used to reading scripture in little chunks, perhaps because we're doing a Bible study or a talk, that we don't always see the connection. And the first thing I noticed this morning as I started looking at this passage was that there is an obvious connection between Jesus entering the house of Zacchaeus, who was a rich man. He was a chief tax collector. He had a lot of money and was able to give away half of it immediately on responding to Jesus. And then Jesus, in that context, telling this parable about the people who have money and what they do with it. We're probably familiar with the parable itself, the story of the ruler going away and giving each of his servants different amounts of money, or and waiting to see what they do with it. But I wonder what it meant in the context of Zacchaeus' house. Zacchaeus, probably the richest person present. And Jesus therefore almost saying to him, what are you going to do with the wealth that you have? You have already given much of it away, but how will you use the wealth that you have? And what about those people who begrudged Zacchaeus having that wealth? The people who saw him as a sinner because he was rich, because he was wealthy, because he worked for the Romans, he worked for the institutions. Were they really jealous of his wealth and his comfort and his sulks and his house? What was Jesus saying to them in this parable? So, I just find it interesting looking at this parable today. A familiar story about, what are we going to do with the wealth that we have? What are we going to do with the talents God has given us? How is that reflected in the way that we love God? But in this context, it almost seems to have a different message. Seeing how Scripture hangs together, seeing how one passage leads into the next, knowing why Jesus told this parable on this occasion, I think is very revealing.